Good morning. This is Carol Dixon. I'm with the Idaho Federation of Families, and welcome to our parent webinar series. Today we have Charmaine Tanner with us, and she is going to present on reducing parent stress and how to have an awesome school year. Charmaine is the owner of the Collaborative Special Education Advocacy that is based here in Meridian, but she does work on a statewide basis with parents all across Idaho. She has 30 years experience as a teacher, and in the last 12 years she's been working specifically in the field of special education advocacy. So Charmaine, thank you so much for joining us. You bring a wealth of education and experience, and I know parents have found this knowledge extremely helpful as they're navigating this school system. So with that, I'm going to let you take it away, and I'll be back at the end to answer questions specific to the topic. So thank you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Carol. So I'm super excited to be here today because we're going to be talking about a topic that's really I'm passionate about, as far as helping parents learn to partner with the school so their child really does have that awesome school year that we all want. So I think what we look at is often, especially in the fall of each year, parents can feel super stressed. Your child is going to a new school maybe, or at least a new grade level. There's going to be new teachers, maybe new therapists at schools. And it's really overwhelming sometimes for parents to learn, how am I going to share all the information that I know about my child so this year's teacher won't have to reinvent the wheel and spend so much time trying to figure things out. So if you've ever felt that overwhelm, especially in the fall when your child's starting with a new teacher, this is something that we'll be talking about today. The other thing that parents can get stressed about is feeling like their child is more capable than maybe what the school is currently giving them credit for. And how do parents engage with that discussion with school staff so the school does see their child as capable and have those high expectations that they need to have in order for the child to be successful? And then the third area that sometimes parents get concerned about and can be kind of frustrating is knowing that maybe teachers' approaches don't necessarily match how their student learns or how their child learns best. So we're going to be talking about those three main areas today. So you're in the right place here if these are some feelings that you've experienced and you'd like to have some specific tips and strategies on how to work those things out. So one of the first topics that we'll be talking about is, like we had said, how not to reinvent that wheel. Because as a parent, you know what works and what doesn't work for your child. So we'll be sharing some tips about how you can do that today. The second area that we'll be concentrating on is this whole concept of giftedness. And yes, even your child who has a disability has gifts. And we want to help teachers learn how to tap into those gifts. And then the third major area that we'll talk about is discovering how teachers can tap into your child's strengths and use that to inform their instructional strategies. So I love this slide with the picture of the kids being excited, and this is what we want all of our kids to experience at school, that excitement that they know, that they're confident, that they can do what has been asked of them, that they have ways to show the teacher what they've learned and what they know. So first I'll just give you a quick background. Carol had introduced me and said, yes, I'm a retired teacher. I was a special education teacher for 15 years. And when I was a special ed teacher, I went to lots of IEP meetings for my students. And I often would give tips to general ed teachers about how students could be successfully included in their classroom, what accommodations could be made. And when I was a special ed teacher, I thought, I've never been a classroom teacher. I don't really know if that's possible to include students with significant disabilities. So I thought I should really transfer from special ed to general ed. And my plan was just to do that for a few years and then go back to being a special ed teacher. But once I went to the classroom as a general ed teacher, I loved that community of kids, and I stayed there for 15 years. So after 30 years, I retired from teaching. In between there, we've had 3 children. Our youngest son, Dylan, happens to have Down syndrome. So I quickly learned that not only do I need skills as a teacher, but as a parent, and I could empathize with other parents as they were on their advocacy journey for how to advocate for their child. I also have been a university instructor with both undergrad and graduate students in special ed department at the University of Colorado. So I think my strength as an advocate now and as a public speaker and a parent trainer is that I can take all this diverse perspectives that I've had and help parents become even more effective advocates for their kids. So let's first look at how not to start that school year over, how to use information that we already know. As a parent, I'm sure you've probably heard, you're your child's best advocate, you know your child best. But often the parents that I work with have that gap, and it's like, when I have to go to school meetings or IEP meetings, I'm not feeling that sense of confidence. I think it happens pretty frequently that when parents are overwhelmed at IEP meetings or 504 meetings, that they look to the teacher to be the expert. As a parent, we tell ourselves, well, the teacher went to college, the teacher learned how to do this, the teacher's had so many years of experience, certainly what the teacher suggests must be the right avenue for us to go down. Well, while that can be true, I think parents also need to have that confidence that you do know your child best. You do know what makes him grumpy and how to help him when he's struggling, or the celebrations that are important to have when he's successful. So I think it's a matter of not necessarily that the parent is right or that the teacher is right. It's not an either or, but it's an and. And so what I really stress is for that partnership to be formed between the teacher and the parent, because each has their own perspective and each has their own skills and strengths. As a parent and as a teacher, we want to work together, because that's when we'll have that awesome school year for our kids. At the beginning of the year, you do want to have time for the new teacher to bond with your child and to get to know them. However, when you're a parent of a student with special needs or an identified disability, you can't just allow, that natural time for that bonding to occur. There might be certain things that you want to make sure that the teacher knows right from the start. And what I find is that so many times teachers will review a child's paperwork, and that's the picture that they have of your child. So let's look at some other strategies that we can use so teachers get that whole picture of your child. One of the things that is really helpful, and I found this true when I was teaching, is if you can ask your child's teacher from last year to talk to the new teacher. Many times teachers will take ideas and suggestions from a colleague that they know, and they'll be more open to doing that until they get to know the parent better. So one strategy would be to have last year's teacher go ahead and have a conversation with your child's new teacher so they can talk teacher to teacher and find out some tips and strategies that way. The other thing is to make a list of what works and what doesn't work for your child. And again, you can do this as a family. You can sit down and you can talk about effective ways that you have seen that works for your child in areas like communication or behavior or academics. You can talk about what kind of a learner your child is. If they learn more when they hear the information, they're more of an auditory learner, or if they learn more when they have visual strategies and a visual schedule that they can follow. So reflect back on your previous years in school with your child and what were the strategies that worked, because that's what we want to replicate again for this next school year. Along with that, we want to also know what doesn't work, because we don't want the teachers this year to spend time using strategies that we've known in the past have not been successful. So just as you want to share what works, you also want to share those ineffective things that have been tried before, and not to spend time on repeating something that really doesn't work with your child. So another suggestion I have for families is to share samples of work from last year. So it might just be a handwriting paper, and you think, well, how much is this going to help the teacher if I show them an example of handwriting that they did last year? Well, there's so many things just on that one worksheet that a new teacher can look at. It's not only the legibility of your child's handwriting, but it's the paper that they used. Was it the wide rule, the narrow? Is there a certain type of handwriting model like Danielian or handwriting without tears that the child was using last year? So when the teacher sees what worked last year, the samples of the work that your child did last year, that can help her decide how she continues your child's teaching and learning plan for the new year. The other thing is your child more of a project kind of person where, this is a slide that has an example of like a science fair project. So for teachers to know, maybe your child is not going to excel if they have to write a 5-page research project or paper. But if they could do an actual hands-on project, that's going to be where your child shines. So sharing those little bits of information will help your child's teacher learn what they should be doing with your child in this new year. The other thing I suggest for parents is for you to share about your child. We want the teacher to have that full picture of your child, not just to read the IEP document and find out what they can't do, because that can be a pretty negative view. So instead, I want parents to be able to share, what kinds of family activities do you do? Does your child play sports, during the summer or during the school year? Are there certain games and toys that they like to play? Do they have pets? And as a parent, you might be thinking, well, why in the world would I want to share all this kind of information with the teacher? Well, we'll find out in a few minutes how those are gold nuggets that your teacher can take, and they can use that information when they're picking out materials for your child to use when they're learning new academic skills. They can use this information to help motivate and keep your child engaged in learning. So the whole idea is that you need to get to know the teacher on a different level, and that the teacher needs to get to know your child on a more personal level and get that full picture instead of just the negative things and all the needs that your child may have. So this is just a quick review of the 5 tips that you can do to make sure that you're not starting each school year off with a whole, new thing, and people are having to spend time when you could be having that conversation and sharing a lot of information at the beginning of the year. So the second main point that we're going to talk about today is the concept of giftedness. And this is something that I learned when my son was just 3 years old, so many years ago. But it's really made an impact not only on our family's life, but as I go and attend IEP meetings and such with other families as an advocate. And I went to a conference years ago, and Judith Snow, who's a self-advocate from Canada, spoke. And Judith talked about the concept of giftedness and how most of us have ordinary gifts. We can walk, we can talk, we can do math and, figure out different problems. But some of us lack those ordinary gifts, but we have extraordinary gifts, like the gift of sense of humor. And that can really be important for a lot of us. Or we might have that extraordinary gift of sharing the importance of being vulnerable and how that's okay and how that's actually valued. So after I heard Judith speak, I was thinking about, my son's 3. We're going to be going to his first IEP meeting. I loved this concept of giftedness and how Judith looked at students and people. And I thought, how can we use this for Dylan's first IEP meeting? So as a family, what we did is we sat down one evening and had a family meeting, and we talked about each other's gifts. And we specifically kind of honed into Dylan's extraordinary gifts that he has. And what I did is I typed up that list of Dylan's gifts, and I thought, what we're going to do is we're going to bring this list to our first IEP meeting and make sure that we share it with the staff. So what I did is I got an empty box and I wrapped it in gift wrap paper, and I put several copies of his gifts into the box. And we carried it up to our elementary school, and we're excited about going to his first IEP meeting. And at the beginning of the meeting, I asked if we could speak first, and we shared the story that Judith Snow had shared with me about the sense of giftedness and how we all have gifts. And so I opened the box and took out a sheet of Dylan's gifts, and we passed the box around so each person sitting at the table for the IEP meeting were able to reflect on Dylan's gifts. And it changed the tone of that IEP meeting. It made it positive. It made us look at, remember, this is the kid we're talking about today. It's not a bunch of test scores. It's not what he can't do. But this is the incredible little kid that we're talking about today. And we need to figure out how we can tap into those gifts when we're teaching him at school. Well, this was such a powerful way for us to start Dylan's first IEP meeting that we continued doing it each IEP meeting. And it became our tradition as a way to start off on a positive note. So I would encourage others to do this also. This is a slide of Judith. She unfortunately passed away a couple years ago, but this is a link that you can go to and read some of her writings about the concept of giftedness. This is a short list of some of the gifts that we had typed on that list of our son's extraordinary gifts. His curiosity, his unconditional love for others, that undaunted spirit that he has. And I look at him now, he's 28 years old, and I still see these as gifts that Dylan has. I think we've discovered new gifts along the way. One of the new gifts that we've discovered is his ability to set a personal goal and to make sure that he achieves that. So that's been something that's been kind of extraordinary. As a student with Down syndrome, one of his goals starting in 3rd grade was to go to college. And I just kind of, never really thought much about that. I didn't really see that as a possibility for him. But as he grew older and as he became in middle school and in high school and he saw his brother and sister going to college, that was Dylan's concept that, he also could go to college. So we had to do a lot of advocating for that. But he was able to go to the University of Colorado for 4 years in audit classes. And that's an example of his extraordinary gift of being able to be determined to reach those goals that he has for himself. So that's something that's really opened up a lot of doors for him as he continues as an adult. I also want to recognize, as a parent, you have so many hats that you're wearing. You're the chauffeur, you're the nurse, you're the doctor, you're the teacher, all of these things that we have to do as parents. So we wear a lot of hats every day. The one hat that I think is really important for us is that detective hat. So I want you to think about the clues that your child is giving you every day about what he likes, what he doesn't like, how he learns best. And parents will tell me, well, I don't know, what kind of a learner my child is. And I think what it is you might not have the educational jargon to translate that, but you do know a lot of things about your child that can be helpful for the teacher. So put that detective hat on and let's talk about some clues that your child might be showing you. So one of the things is just to always be observant, because your child is showing you things on the weekend of what he likes to do or not do, or your child is showing you when he's doing homework. Does he need that quiet space? Or is he the kind of kid that needs to be listening to music on his headphones in order to do his homework? All those little things can add up. And the goal is that we share that with the teachers so they understand your child better, not only as a whole person, but also as a learner. So parents will say, well, how do I figure all this out? So one of the things that you can do is to think, just be reflective and think about what you're proud of for your child. Now that's not only accomplishments like maybe the T-ball trophy he got or something, but think also about the personality traits that you're proud of that your child has. And jot those down. It might be things like he's empathetic. He's always the first one that notices when somebody else in class is upset and he wants to go and talk to his friend and make sure things are better. There could be other traits that you can look at, that determination, that sense of determination that maybe your child has. So again, just make some mental notes and then transfer those to a piece of paper when you're going to parent-teacher conferences or such. These are things that you can share with your child's teacher. Another fun thing that you could do, besides you don't actually have to write magic marker on your kid's hands, but is to think of adjectives that would describe your child. Because this is another way that parents can look and try to tap into that innate knowledge that they have about their kids, but they aren't confident that they know a lot about their child. But sit down, it might be something that you do at a dinner time, discussion at your dining room table, and have everybody go around and share adjectives for each person in the family and get a sense of what would be some adjectives that would describe your child. And like I said, make a mental note and then jot those down later on paper, and you can refer to those later. The other thing is, when you're taking those mental notes, is to really be observant. One of the examples that I share often with parents is if your child is that problem solver. And one of the examples that I give is when our son Dylan was about 4 years old. It was the morning after Halloween, and you know how kids always want to get into their Halloween candy and sample that. So Dylan got up in the morning and he's asking for his Halloween candy, and I would say, no, Dylan, it's too early. You can't have candy in the morning. And he kept on and on and on, and I kept saying, no, Dylan, it's too early. And then I thought, well, I better say this in another way because obviously I'm not getting my message across. So I said, Dylan, after lunch, you can have some of your Halloween candy. Well, guess what he did? He went to the refrigerator, he got out some lunch meat and cheese and ate it and said, lunch all done, candy. So this is an example of a kid that's got great problem-solving skills, right? I've always said that there's no IQ test that a psychologist could have given Dylan that would have showed these kinds of problem-solving skills. So sometimes, we're frustrated with our kids and their determination, but you can look at this as another way, that they do have ways to figuring out how to get around things and how to solve problems. This can be a strength of your child. And this kind of example you can share with the teachers so they understand and they give your child credit for having higher cognitive skills than maybe they had once expected of your child. The other thing that can be really helpful is to talk to other people that know your children. Talk to the babysitter. The babysitter might know that, when they turn TV on in the afternoon, your child can read all the titles of his favorite TV program. Well, guess what? That shows a lot of good reading skills. If he's doing that at the babysitter's house, we can expect him to be a reader in the classroom. Or you might talk to your child's t-ball soccer coach, something like that, and the coach could give you insights that you didn't even know, like your child is always prepared and he's the first one on the field and he really intently listens to the coach's directions and he can follow those directions. So if you know that happens on the soccer field, then there can be an expectation that your child will also follow directions and do well in school. Or you can talk to relatives, and your relatives often will see things about your child that you might not notice. So look at all the people that know your child and have a conversation with them before you go to meetings so you have more rich information and examples that you can share. Now, I have a picture here on the slide of somebody playing the piano. And I had a friend who had a son in elementary school, and he happened to have Down syndrome, and a lot of kids with Down syndrome have shorter fingers, and fine motor is one of the things that they work on. Well, the mom had asked the occupational therapist to include in the IEP that he start working on keyboarding skills. And yes, he was in elementary school, but we know elementary kids these days start learning keyboarding and using the computer. Well, the OT was really reluctant to write a goal for him to learn keyboarding because she felt like he didn't have that fine motor control. Well, guess what? The parent invited the piano teacher to come to the IEP meeting, and the piano teacher was able to share how he's just really flourishing, learning to play the piano at a beginning level, but still he was doing well as far as putting his fingers on the right keys and such. So by having that outside person share that information, then the family was able to get and convince the occupational therapist that a keyboarding goal was indeed something that their child could be successful with. So when you're going to meetings, when you're thinking about how you're going to be planning for this next year, think about people outside of your family that might have information that would be really helpful for that school team. So I hope you're getting some practical ideas because I don't want to share theory. I want to share, exact examples of things that really have worked for kids. One of the things that you can do is go to YouTube. I have a YouTube channel. You can go to YouTube and just type in Collaborative Special Education Advocacy. And there's quite a few videos there about identifying your children's gifts, how to use their strengths, how to talk and get things implemented into their IEP. So my YouTube channel would be another resource that you can get additional information at. So our third and last major point that we're going to talk about right now is discovering what your students or your child's strengths are and how we can tap into that and help him learn more at school. As special ed teachers, we're trained to identify what the children can't do, what their needs are, and make a case that they qualify for special education services. So I think sometimes special ed teachers are so focused on making sure that we give students supports for what they need, they don't realize that if they knew more about the child's strengths, that would really help them meet the child's needs. There's ways to teach a child through his strengths so he can learn more. So that's what we're going to be talking about now for a few minutes. So let's look at the example of your child loves to be on the soccer field, and it's like, well, that's great. So if you told your child's teacher, you know, he just shines on the soccer field. I mean, every Saturday morning, that's what he loves to do, and he just really excels at it. So you might be thinking as a parent, well, you know, why would I want to tell my kid's teacher that he loves soccer? What does that have to do with teaching? So let's look at a couple examples of how that could be beneficial. One, if the teacher knows that your child is really active and those gross motor skills are something that he excels at, you might look at, you know, does your PE teacher at your building have a way that students can be assistants and a PE assistant for maybe a younger class? So that might be a way that your child could share his skills. And we all always know that when you have to teach somebody, you learn more. So if your child's teacher knows that that's a strength for your child, they could tap into that by having him help maybe younger kids. You could also look at it as the librarian or the media person. If they know your child loves soccer, but they're kind of a reluctant reader and they're not that excited about reading, maybe if the librarian can kind of show them where the books, sports or specifically soccer are, that could be something that would engage your child and motivate him to become an even better reader. I mean, you can do things like, you know, in math class, you can hold up a soccer ball and you can talk about the shapes that make up that soccer ball, and you can bring geometry into that. So there's many ways that teachers can tap into those interests to keep your child engaged and also for them to teach them new things. So sharing simple things like what your child likes to do on the weekends is something that really can be helpful for teachers at school. So here are some other examples of what might be student strengths and how you can figure out a corresponding strategy that the teacher could use. So what I suggest is that parents just set up an informal time to talk to your child's teacher, and just take a piece of paper, fold it in half, and on the left-hand side you write down all the strengths that your child has and you get input from the teacher. And then on the right-hand side of the paper you look at, so if I know this about the student, how can that help me as a teacher? So for instance, if your child loves being with younger children and playing games and doing things with younger kids, and your child, that's a strength and an interest, maybe your child has the need to become a better reader. So what you could do is you could have that student maybe once a week go to the kindergarten class and read them a story. So he's working on his need of becoming a better reader, but you're doing that with something that's really going to be motivating and engaging for him, that he can be that teacher in the kindergarten class once a week and read the little kids a story. So that's what we want to see teachers doing. On IEPs, there's a place for you to write down what the student's strengths are. But what I see missing is that connection between what the strength is and what I can do as a teacher and how I can capture that into an instructional strategy. So for older students, it might be, you know, your son just loves looking at astronomy magazines. Well, when I'm doing his high school schedule, if I know that your child loves astronomy, one of the things that I would want to do is make sure a class like Earth and Space is inserted into his high school schedule so he gets that elective class. So many times our kids are only spending their entire school day working on things that they can't do very well, and we don't give them that chance to also have elective classes where they're really interested in something. I think to myself as an adult, it's like, what would my day be like if I had to do, time after time of things that I don't do well, or things that are really challenging for me, that would be a pretty, negative, kind of depressing day for me. Instead, what I try to do is look at what I enjoy, how I can learn more. And that's what we want teachers to do with our kids. We want them to look at how our kids can learn more through their interests, through their talents. And that's something that will help your child have an awesome school year. So here's another example. What if you have one of those Lego lovers in your house? Hopefully this isn't what your living room floor looks like, really, at the end of the day, especially if it's in the evening and you know what it's like to step on Legos. But a lot of kids are like, this is like something that is just takes up all their free time, is making things out of Legos. So again, it's like, wow, that's great, but how's that going to help a teacher at school? So if I was the teacher and I knew that your child loved Legos, some of the things that I might do would be to use Legos when I'm teaching. So make sure that I have Legos. And it can be things like, I'm teaching the concept of contractions during reading time. And on the bottom Lego, you could have the contraction, and then you could build 2 Legos on top of that, the 2 words that make up that contraction. Or if I know that your child loves using Legos at home and building things, that might give me that aha moment of, he really seems to like manipulating things. So when we're doing math, I'm going to make sure we have those base 10 blocks out, and he can use those math manipulatives, and that's probably going to help him. Or if it's a child that needs to work on writing, written language kinds of skills, and I know it's really hard to get him excited about sitting down and writing a story, maybe what I could do is have him first take a few minutes and build some kind of figure or structure out of Legos, and then have him write a story about what he just made with the Legos. So that's a way to, work on a child's needs, but use it through an area of strength or an area of interest. And that will help him have an awesome school year. So let's see, for some reason, there we go. Let me go back one. It's always a challenge, technology. There we go. So this is just a summary slide of what I hope you've been able to take from our time today with our webinar. Is one, I want you to feel confident as a parent that you do know your child. And when you partner with a teacher and you both share information that you know about the child, that's going to make it a really positive school year. I want you to be able to feel confident in your partnership with teachers. I also want you to know that what you do as a parent makes a big difference for your child. So the more effective you can be as an advocate, the more that's going to help your child shine and be successful at school. So I have a couple ways that you can get more individualized help from me, because today we've kind of used some examples that maybe don't apply to your child, and it's like, yeah, but what about my child? So I always offer a free 30-minute phone consultation with families. So if there's, some questions that you have after listening to the webinar and you'd love to just kind of bounce ideas off of somebody else, or if there's specific questions that you have about your child, feel free to contact me. You can email me at charmaine@cspeda.com, and we can set up a time to talk. Another free resource that I have for you is a book that I've written. It's actually been a #1 best-selling book on Amazon, and it's called The Art of Advocacy, A Parent's Guide to a Collaborative IEP Process. And I've given several copies of the book to the Federation, so if you're in the Treasure Valley area, you could come by their office and check out one of the books, and that would be a way that you could get additional information. Or if you want your own copy, you could go on Amazon and get a copy there. So I want you to know that you do have the power to be a change maker for your child, and you've already been doing that, and I think with just maybe some additional tips and strategies that you'll even be a more effective advocate for your child, and that will mean that your child will be more successful at school. So I think what we're going to do now, we have a little bit of time, and so I thought, Carol often gets different questions from families, so I think it would be great if we could just, go into some more specific questions that maybe she's gotten from families, and spend a couple of minutes doing that.
Yeah, great. Thank you for your information. So you're right. There are a lot of really common questions that I have parents that ask, and it's like I've been saving them and waiting for an opportunity to sit down and talk with you. So one of the ones that I most frequently hear is, should parents bring children into an IEP meeting, and how do they make that decision? When is the right time? Under what circumstances? And just kind of what your thoughts are about having the kids participate in the process.
So yeah, I think that's a great question, because we do want our kids to eventually be self-advocates. As a parent, we're advocates for our kids, but that should be us modeling for them how they can achieve that. So our family just made a personal decision, and I think each family needs to be able to make their own decision, but our family chose to always have Dylan at his IEP meetings. So even when he was 3 years old, he attended his IEP meeting. One of the first meetings we had was actually at our house, and we invited the school staff to come, and Dylan could be playing in the living room with his toys and his dog, and the rest of us could be, conversing and filling out the IEP form. But it gave a way for the school staff to see Dylan in a natural environment and see him as a real person versus just reading records. And then when Dylan was in kindergarten, we had it in the kindergarten classroom. So again, he could be playing at the different centers, but there were a couple times where we would call him back to the table and say, well, Dylan, who are your friends at school? Or what do you like to do at school? What's fun? So at the very beginning, we were asking some really, easy questions for young kids to answer. But as your kids get older, they can be more involved in the IEP meeting. I know some families just feel comfortable for their child to be there at the beginning of the meeting when you're talking about strengths and what your child does well at school, and have the child, give their input and then maybe, leave the meeting and go back to class. But for sure, as kids are in middle school and high school, I really believe that they all need to be participating, because this is a plan that you're helping write for their future. They need that input. For older kids, sometimes what's helpful is for them to invite friends to the IEP meeting. And sometimes you don't think about that because it's usually a group of adults, but the peers have so many great ideas that as adults we never think of. So that would be something I would encourage families to do, is to also have them invite peers that can provide input. Like, well, we notice when she's in class, if I help her find that place in the book, then she can go right to it and figure out the rest of it, but she has problems finding the right page or something. Or, just different tips that kids have learned by being a classmate of your child. So things like that. As children get older, they should participate more. Some kids do PowerPoints to the IEP team, or some will bring like a scrapbook of photos to show what they like. But again, your child is going to have to be speaking up for themselves more, and so you want to have them in the IEP meeting in a safe environment and practicing those skills.
Okay. And this question kind of dovetails a lot with that. It's in regards to helping your child become their own self-advocate. So even outside of IEP meetings, are there things as kids get older that they can be doing to learn to become their own advocates?
Right. And I think that is important, because so what I think helps is, we had talked about earlier in the webinar of making a list of your child's strengths, or what works and what doesn't work. So as your child gets older, they need to have input into writing that up beforehand, because you want them to be able to later be able to talk to not only their teachers, but employers to say, if I have this accommodation, it makes it really easy for me to do my job. This is what makes it really difficult. So not only for future employers, but when they go to a doctor's office, they need to be able to say, when I take my medicine, this is how I feel. And they need to be able to use those words versus the parents always trying to relay that. So I think as much as possible, they hear us model that, but then they need the practice in different settings to learn how to say those things.
Yeah, so one thing to add from my own experience with my son who was on an IEP and trying to encourage him to take those steps, because he was really fearful of advocating for himself. He wanted to hide, he just wanted to blend in. As I was encouraging him to take those steps, is at the same time I was letting the teachers know that he was going to approach them so that they were ready and they understood what a big deal it was for this kid to come and say, this is really hard for me, or this is something that I need, so that they were keyed in on being really responsive to that request. And I think that found several times that for him, he was successful, and once he was successful, he was more willing to do it again. I think that's just a key part for our kids, and I would love to have seen him start earlier than later, but he still managed to get it done. So.
There you go.
So how about for parents that want to have their children included in more gen ed classes as opposed to being in self-contained or some special classes? How do they go about trying to encourage that in the school to allow them in the classroom more?
And that's something that I really work a lot with families on. That's something that a lot of families have as a goal for their child to be able to be in general education classes more. Because what I find is when kids only go to music and art with their general ed class, or the teacher goes, well, they're also invited to come to parties, and it's like your child is really a visitor. They're not a member of that general education classroom. And so what we need to do is help teachers feel confident. I think teachers are well-meaning, but many general education teachers have that lack of confidence. It's like, I didn't go to school to be a special ed teacher. How am I going to work with a child with, disabilities in my class? So a model that helps and is implemented in a lot of schools is a co-teaching model, where the special education teacher or sometimes a paraeducator will actually co-teach with the general ed classroom teacher. And so that's a way to share skills. Usually the general ed teacher knows a lot more about content, and the special ed teacher knows more about instructional strategies. So that's a perfect team to put together. And then the other thing that you can do is have related service people, like your speech therapist or your occupational therapist, actually work some with the child in the classroom versus taking the child out, going down the end of the hall, and nobody knows what they're doing. So I used to have the occupational therapist come to my classroom when we were doing writing, and so I could see how she was helping the child with, their pencil grasp, how she was making sure his feet were touching the floor, all of these little things that I didn't know. But now when the OT left and I had all those other, days of the week when there wasn't the occupational therapist there, I could continue what she had taught me. So I think by pushing in more services and helping kids be supported in the classroom, the general ed teacher learns those strategies that, The other thing I think that is really important is for general ed teachers to know that when you have a child with disabilities in your classroom, it makes you become a better teacher. I had a little girl in my second grade class who wore hearing aids, and I needed to use an FN system where I spoke with a microphone. And one day we were watching a Reading Rainbow video, and I thought, I should learn how to turn on the closed caption on the TV. So if Brianna can't hear it, at least she can see the subtitles. Well, guess what? All my second graders were learning how to be better readers. So that was an accommodation I made for Brianna, but it helped everybody. So I think once general ed teachers know, it's not like, oh, I have to make all these changes and do all of this different for one kid. It really makes you a better teacher, and all the kids are going to benefit from it.
Good point. And this one kind of ties into it. How about when you would like to see a one-on-one aid for your child in a regular classroom? And I think that's kind of a common request, but is kind of a challenging one. Thoughts on that?
Right. I often hear parents that will be concerned about things happening at school or not happening at school, and one of their first solutions that they kind of go to is, well, let's request a one-on-one aid. So what I like to help parents realize is there's a big goal that you have out there for your child, and there's probably many ways, many paths to get there. So I want to look at why are you asking for that one-on-one aid? So sometimes it can be a safety issue. Like when my child's on the playground, there's all these openings in the fence, and I'm afraid my child's going to get off the playground. So I want a one-on-one person to make sure my child is safe at school. Or maybe it can be my child's in general education, but I don't think he's learning much. So I want a one-on-one to make sure that he's learning. Well, being safe and learning at school are goals that we all have for our kids. Having a one-on-one para might be a solution, but then I want us to be open and say, how else might we reach those goals? Because the reality is sometimes that one-on-one para can actually be more harmful for our kids. It can be hard for our kids to socially interact with their peers when there's always this adult kind of attached to them. And so if additional help is needed, what I would like to see instead is that a para be assigned to the classroom. So she's a classroom para, not Johnny's para. And yes, she can specifically help, Johnny, but she's also there, and she knows that she's going to have permission and be able to walk around and help other kids in the class besides that one student. So that, I think, is a better approach versus assigning a one-on-one.
Okay. So I have also, if a teacher's unfamiliar with my child's mental health challenges or the best behavioral interventions, how can I request that they receive information and training to better work with my child?
Yeah, and this is a great question because so many teachers and principals and other administrators don't realize that under IDEA, which is the federal law that, shows us what's supposed to be happening in special education and in public schools, part of it is not only that the child gets services and supports, but any staff that works with the child can also have supports. And so this can be a little bit of a delicate topic because you don't want people to feel defensive, like, oh, you don't know what you're doing, you need extra help. But instead, if we approach it as, as a parent, I never knew what to do when I figured out these challenges of my child and I needed to get extra resources. And as a teacher, I know you have a lot of kids and this might be a situation you're not familiar with. So what kind of additional supports or training can we write into the IEP so the school's accountable for providing that help to you? But that's a conversation that you can have, and if you already have your IEP written, you can always go back and amend it and ask for specific training because different kids with different needs need different kinds of behavioral interventions. So something like, ABA therapy or compliance training, that might not be an appropriate behavior intervention for your child. So we want to make sure that they're individualized. If the teacher doesn't have experience or knowledge with that kind of need, then there's nothing wrong with saying, I would love to get some extra help here. So you can actually write that in the IEP so they can get that.
That is so interesting because that is nothing I ever knew about, and how essential that, the teachers, in terms of really recognizing the best way to work with the child, to put that in an IEP. For me, that's the nugget that I'm taking. That's a great one. How about for those that are finishing school and looking to go towards college? what do they need to be doing that last year, and what do they need to understand about their IEP, and does that exist when they leave high school and move on into college?
So IEPs don't exist in college. You can have accommodations, but you don't have the specialized design instruction like you do in IEPs. So I think a couple of things are important for parents to understand is that most schools will offer transition services for kids between ages of 18 and in Idaho up to age 21. And a lot of districts will have set transition programs, but that can really be individualized, and it should be individualized for your child. So it depends on what your child's plans are for himself. If he would like to leave high school at 18 and not return the next year, and he gets his diploma, parents need to understand that special ed services stop at that point, and it's not something you can go back and change your mind on. So I pretty much recommend that parents continue to get special ed services up to age 21. That doesn't mean that your child keeps going back to high school for 3 more years and all his other friends are out working or going to school. But it can be individualized. So, for example, for our son, he knew with his brother and sister that once you graduate, you leave, you go to college, you do something else. So for him, for his transition services, he got transportation from our community to the university, and he got some para support to learn the city bus system. So he was doing things like that for transition. But it depends on the child. I mean, if they're looking for employment or they want more vocational training, that can be something that can be written into their transition plan. And you want to start that transition planning ahead of time, because if it's a student that wants to go to college, you need to make sure during those high school years that he's got enough credits for math and English and whatever colleges require. The other good news is there's more and more opportunities for students with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities to actually attend college classes now. Mm-hmm. So parents need to know that that's an opportunity. You can't like cross that off your list and say, oh, my child has a disability. We're not going to see that as a realistic goal, because that can be a goal still for all kids.
So they're building a lot of supports, it seems like, to be able to take kids past college level, whichever path they choose they want to take.
Right,
yeah,
right.
That's pretty exciting. I mean, you may have covered this one already, but again, it's one that I hear from a lot of parents in terms of who should they consider taking to an IEP meeting with them, because it is so intimidating. I had heard you mention that, to show up at a table filled with professionals that often speak a language that they're unfamiliar with. So who should they consider to bring alongside kind of as their support?
So I think whoever makes you comfortable. So that can be a spouse, that can be a neighbor that knows your child or knows you. I think one person that you want to have come is somebody that can maybe take notes of the meeting. Usually the school staff will be taking notes, but it's always a good idea to have your notes too. And as a mom or a dad, it's hard to engage in the conversation plus be taking accurate notes. So I think somebody who would be your volunteer assistant to take notes is good. And then other people that know your child. So sometimes it's a relative, sometimes it's a babysitter. It can be a variety of people, but usually you want somebody sitting next to you that you know is giving you that moral support. Mm-hmm. There are times when parents feel more comfortable if an advocate comes that knows more about the educational jargon and kind of the process. So if you're at a point where you're really unsure of, if things are really happening like they're supposed to be, according to the regulations and everything, that might be a time to consider having an advocate come. But I think most important is you want that moral support, because it can be very intimidating. It's real emotional for you to be talking about your child and for you to hear what other people say about your child. So you want to feel like you've got some people, that are there for you too.
Mm-hmm. It makes a difference. just like I said, with your own level of comfort, but then somebody else is kind of watching out and
Right.
paying attention to the details too. Okay.
Right.
So that's pretty much what I have question-wise. I just want to, again, thank you so much for coming and sharing your knowledge, your expertise, and your passion, because you've been working in this field for a long time. And you're a great resource to the state of Idaho for our parents that are all across the state. I hope you'll take advantage of the opportunity. If you have questions or concerns, to definitely contact Charmaine. The knowledge goes about as deep as anywhere you're going to find for our Idaho special education, kind of the rules and how our system works. So, again, thank you very much. I
You're
hope
welcome.
you'll come back again.
You're welcome. Yes, I love working with you guys, and I think it's a great way to reach out to more families by having this accessible on your website, and other families can watch it. And
Yeah, awesome.
so good.
So thank you very much. We will see you all again at our next parent webinar series.